So today, Palm Sunday, we celebrate the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem as Messiah. This is a big event in the story of Jesus' life, and it was an important day. Yet, in the gospel story, you almost hear less about the entry than you hear about the donkey. It's a long story about a short horse. And that's perhaps important, that it isn't a horse. And I'm very fond of the donkey in this story. Everyone knew that for Jesus, this was the culmination of his ministry thus far. And it was Passover. This was the major celebration of the Jewish community. This is the time you've got to be together. You've got to be together as family. And at the time when the temple was there, you really had to be in Jerusalem at the temple if you could possibly make it. So the place was full of devout, observant Jews celebrating being freed from slavery, being given a land of promise, and being led out with God's powerful hand, Moses leading them. This was the last meal they ate as slaves in Egypt before they went out. And Jews throughout the world still celebrate this as the defining moment of being set free from slavery and being given the liberty of the children of God. It was a big day, and Jesus needed to make a big impression. And as he came in, this procession was going to go on, and it was a big thing. But I want you to listen to the story, bearing in mind all that stuff about the importance of the event, because this story is a paradigm of understatement. Jesus calls two disciples so unimportant that nobody bothered to remember their names. And he says to them, I want you to go and get me a donkey. And he sends them off with detailed instructions about where to go and how to get it, and even a password in case anybody asks them. Tell them the Lord needs it. Somebody does ask them, they say, the Lord needs it. They go, oh, carry on. Got the right password, jolly good. This was planned. Jesus had thought about this. Jesus had set this up. It was thought through. It mattered. Jesus wanted a donkey. Have you ever ridden a donkey? Hands up if you've ever ridden a donkey. What an underrepresented group of people donkey riders are in this congregation. When I was about 10 years old, my family lived in England, and there's a holiday resort called Weston-super-Mare, where the Severn Estuary comes into the left-hand side of England. And instead of glorious beaches, it's sort of mud flats. And it's an old Victorian holiday resort where, you know, you went because you really had nowhere else to go and life was miserable, but you made the best of it. And so they had donkey rides. There would be donkey rides. So my father said, you should have a donkey ride. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. Now, I was about this big. I wasn't really big. I was about this big. Probably about that big. And they put me on this donkey. And honestly, my toes, I had to keep my feet up because my toes were trailing on the ground otherwise. And this donkey was ghastly. The thing had no suspension. And its body went up and down like this. So it was like trying to ride a jackhammer. And there was nothing glorious about it. You're on an animal that's way too small. It was embarrassing. And Jesus had a colt, the foal of a donkey. So this is like a new donkey, untrained to the beaches of Weston-super-Mare, untrained to carrying people. So not only was he on a donkey, which looks ridiculous if you're a grown man, it looks stupid if you're 10. But he was on one that was probably going to be skittish because it was new to carrying people, and it was quite likely to throw him off. This was not a glorious way to enter into Jerusalem on this day. But I imagine what the disciples thought. Jesus calls the disciples, right, you and you, come over here, I've got a job for you. They go, oh, Jesus has got a job for us. This will be great. This will be important. This will be marvelous. He says, I need a vehicle to get into Jerusalem. And they're thinking, oh, yes. What shall we have? A Cadillac Escalade. And those big black sort of SUV trucks. The engine's this far off the ground. Huge engine. You could pull a harvester behind with one of those. And they've got tinted windows. They're driven in by presidents, by dictators, and apparently by drug dealers. But these are cars, you see them coming, they look dangerous. You just have the feeling you should get out of the way of this vehicle because whoever's in it is not going to be messing about. So I think, oh yes, that's what we'll get. And Jesus says to them, yeah, I've got it picked out. It's at this dealership, and you'll recognize it. It's soft top, folded down. It's a baby Fiat, and it's pink. This is not a vehicle for somebody who's coming in as a president, as a ruler, as a king. That's what the donkey is saying. The donkey is saying, look, what do you think the pink open-top Fiat is saying? What do you think the donkey is saying about the person in it? What are they projecting about the image they want you to notice? A friend of mine, David Coop, teaches at Wycliffe, and some years ago he preached a sermon I listened to called The Upside Down Kingdom, where he described the kingdom of heaven as a place where all the values and all the rules seem to be inverted. He said, in the upside down kingdom of God, it's not authority, but it's service. It's not power, but vulnerability. It's not force, but invitation. It's not a bulldozer, but a gift held in God's open hand. It's not victory, but self-offering, even to death. That's the pinnacle of the upside-down kingdom. I have not made it there yet. Still, when my mind slips into neutral, it's things like James Bond movies that I really like, and I've had 2 children staying in my house this week, and we watched 3 cartoons from the library on DVDs that included the places where it kind of goes joggity joggity jog because somebody spilt milk on it. But they had great Batman cartoons, people leaping about and knocking each other on the head, and it was great fun. And this story calls me back from that, because in the Batman movies, it is the powerful, the strong, the wealthy that win. But in the story of Jesus, it's a subversion. Palm Sunday is a subversion of all of that. Batman has a Batmobile. Jesus has a donkey. It's turning things around. The emblem of the cross is the throne. Everything is inside out. I think for me, as I look at this story, perhaps more than the donkey, the people that matter for me, as I try to understand this, is the 2 disciples. It's them I have to look to and learn from. Most of us, as we live out our part of the gospel in Toronto in these years, are like these 2 unrecorded people. Very few of us will go down in history. Very few of our names will be remembered more than a generation after our lives have ended. We're not asked to do heroic things. We're not asked mostly to be dramatic. We're not asked to carry the gospel into deepest, darkest Scarborough or North York in its darker reaches. We're called to be disciples like those 2 whose names weren't remembered, and we're asked to just be there and to do what we're given to do right in front of us in that moment by moment. It's not to be glorious, but it's just to be who you are, and to be honestly and truly who you really are in God's sight is hard enough. Holiness is the path that's being described on Palm Sunday. It's the path of the donkey and the two disciples. The two disciples who, almost as soon as their task is over, don't get noticed or mentioned again. Holiness is practiced in small things, in the now, in the moment by moment of life. Holiness, for people like those disciples and for people like us, is folding laundry, doing it with love and with peace for the person who will wear it. It's washed dishes, cooked meals, visiting that person you know who lives alone and is lonely and perhaps is also difficult. It's caring for family and friends. And it's in pay slips, slowly taking care of the bills, and letters written on birthdays to people that you might otherwise have forgotten. And it is for you because you're here in this church of the Transfiguration, and this is your spiritual home. It's here that you can look for paths of holiness laid out for you. In worship services attended, in study groups participated in acts of service to people in the neighborhood or to groups that are cared about. It's getting involved in committees where you try to push forward the work of the committee rather than become the loudest voice or the most sought-after member. It's working on the finance committee without hope of personal profit, which incidentally is why in the diocesan rules clergy aren't allowed on finance committees. It's working for justice, bearing in mind who you're trying to bring justice to without even being noticed yourself. It is in making sure that the last person to leave goes with a word of blessing, and that the lights are switched off with a whispered prayer, and that the outer door is shut and locked up at last with gratitude. Holiness is being a disciple without your name being remembered. It's being someone who acted faithfully because you were asked to and called to. Holiness is doing great things, but perhaps more importantly, doing small things with great love. Holiness is the unglorious donkey work of the kingdom of heaven. But if you move the kingdom of heaven only 1 inch forward in your lifetime, it's enough. We're called, like those disciples, to find the one who sees in secret, and in secret will reward you. Just as Jesus, I think, rewarded those two disciples as the crowd got noisier and noisier and people threw down more and more palm branches and garments on the road, and Jesus bounced along on his ludicrous donkey. I think at one point he looked over his shoulder and caught the eye of those two disciples and grinned at them naughtily, knowing the joke he was playing. May we all, like those two, be content to be with the donkey, to be joyful that we have done our bit. Not only because what we do is a blessing, but that who we are is left quietly aside in peace and in love. May we be blessed to have a low place in the upside down kingdom. Amen.